Well, welcome back to week 2 of topic 5, ideologies in the latter 1800s. We talked a little bit about that last week. We kind of ended up with our last video talking about the emergence of ideologies during this period. And so I want to get into it and look at some of the different ideologies that are emerging, particularly liberalism, nationalism, and then there's a whole bunch more that just kind of like pop up as we get closer and closer to the turn of the 19th century. So without further ado, let's jump into it and let's go at it. So before we get into specifics, I want to kind of let you know there are 3 videos for this week's lesson, The Rise and Clash of Ideologies, part 1, 2, and 3. I have to apologize because we're going to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth over time. And because we're trying to lay foundations, lay understanding before we get to the turn of the century and setting everything up for World War I. Everything is sort of climaxing. Remember a couple weeks ago I was talking about that roller coaster ride where we're in that kind of going up to the top. We know it's coming. It's almost there, and we're going to go, and we're going to go crazy. That's what's happening very shortly. So we got to get all the layers down. So I want to talk first about what is an idea and how does an idea become an ideology. What is ideology? If I were to ask you if you think of an ideology off of the top of your head, you would probably say something like liberalism, some ism, some communism, something along those lines. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about. We're going to look at this particular time frame between about 1850 and 1880, maybe 1890 at the most. All of these isms are going to emerge and start rising up and conflicting with one another and fueling one another at the same time. And that's what we're talking about. What then is an ism? What is this ideology? What is the difference between having an idea of liberal and what it means to be a liberal and to have liberalism? So yes, in systems, there's a system of beliefs. They're sort of, I wouldn't say they're written out, but they are understood. They're almost doctrines. If you are a follower of liberalism, you are a proponent of liberalism, then there are certain sets of rules and values and wants and desires that you are focused on. They shape and inform whatever narrative is, whatever the story is of your reality. And that's what we're going to get at, are these narratives. How are these narratives for all of these systems of ideas playing against one another during this time frame? Again, between 1850 and 1880, all of these start to emerge. These are the rise of ideologies. So for liberalism, what is this new liberalism? This new liberalism at this time really is much against mob rule. Remember back in the French Revolution, you had the rise of the mob, and that was considered a kind of liberal way of thinking. This is a new twist. We don't like the mob rule. We don't like the mob riots. In 1871, you had the Paris Commune. Napoleon III is taken down. The empire is taken down, and a Paris Commune, like communism, this commune, this community of people rise up, and they are incredibly violent. They are reacting to the Franco-Prussian War. They're losing. They don't like the outcomes of this war. This is a working class uprising. These are the people who are just your common everyday folks working in the factories. They did fight for things like women's rights, workers' rights, and relief from the church, meaning the oppressiveness of the church, the dogma, telling us what we have to do and how we have to live. They wanted to be free of that. But they were very violent. They were lots of riots, lots of burnings. They would hold up big barricades in the middle of the streets, and they would fight with the soldiers. They brought clerics These would be priests, these would be monks, these would be people who are working within the Catholic Church. They put them up before, mock firing squads or all of us, spontaneous firing squads. And the crowds would just kill them. This kind of reaction, this kind of radicalism at this time was not considered something that the new liberals wanted to be a part of. And so at this time, French rise up and they put down this Paris Commune in a matter of months. So it's like it starts in March and it ends in May. And a third French Republic rises up in its place, a more liberal valued, new liberal valued government. Liberalism, these new liberals, they're against despotism. They're against the tyrant. They're against the guy who's going to put his thumb on everybody. They're against foreign oppression. This would be people like who are the folks who are in India, the folks who are in these colonies that are being oppressed and put down by foreign oppression. They tend to be pro-business, free trade, free markets. They like to be able to be in control of their own destinies as far as economy and trade goes, which means, of course, they're against government regulation of trade. So things like the mercantile, fiscal, military state, remember way back in the commercial revolution days, that was a big one. Corn laws that were in England that said you can't buy grains outside of England, you have to buy English-grown grain. Those types of things, those protectionist types of things, they would definitely be against. Here's a picture of an anti-corn law certificate. They were part of the National Anti-Corn Law League. And we're going to take a little quick look at it. If you look at the very top part of the banner, it says, "He that withholdeth corn, the people shall curse." That's their motto. That's over the top of it. And what does that mean? Well, on the left side of this picture, you had this family. This was the dear bread family. Dear bread situation. Dear meaning really expensive. It was so dear, so precious because it cost so much. The families here are wearing patched old clothes. They're very hungry. There's no happiness here because they have to buy very expensive British-grown grains in order to sustain life. This one, the other side, the right side of this certificate, is the cheap bread family. Cheap not meaning that it's somehow less in quality cheap, but that it's cheaper price-wise. Why? Because they can buy it from any market, anybody that's around who wants to sell it to them. If they can sell them at a cheaper price, they would rather buy it. And look at these folks. Their clothes are fine clothes. Everybody's happy. They're all plump. Nobody's starving of hunger. They enjoy the inexpensive grain from free markets, free openness. And so that's why they like that. Another thing about liberalism, one of their beliefs, systematic kind of beliefs, is they really encouraged associations and co-ops. Co-ops, in this area you might know of Granger. It's a co-op. That's one of them. There's many in this area. We're very farm-based in this region. Two primary associations and co-ops kind of emerged during this time frame: the workers' associations and the farmers' associations, farmers' co-ops. So this would be one that popped up. It was 1851 in England. This was the Amalgamated Society of Engineers, Machinists, Millwrights, Smiths, and Pattern Makers. And it was part of the certificate. It's kind of like a guild almost. You got together and you watched each other's backs. You would pay dues into this over time. And as membership rose, as the money that came in kind of accumulated, if somebody had a funeral that needed to be paid for, someone got sick and needed medical bills taken care of, someone's crop completely got destroyed or something in a fire, it was a way to kind of ensure that people were going to be taken care of. They took care of one another through these associations. Another one was Granger's. The Granger's was a farmers co-op, very, very popular during the 1867, right around there. And if you were to blow up this poster, you can look it up on Google, blow up this poster, it touches every aspect of life. They have dances, it's about farming, there are councils that meet together to share ideas, again, and share the burdens, share the risks that came with being sort of like alone and on their own. They didn't want to rely on government, big government, to kind of get them out of trouble. Instead, they wanted to rely on each other. They wanted to be their own boss, their own solutions. And that was a great deal. It was a great opportunity for people to work with one another. Another belief, systematic belief of liberalism at this time, was religious tolerance. Again, do not put an oppressive state-ran church or religion over a particular people group. They didn't like that. They wanted to expand women's rights and women's roles as well. It sort of makes sense, and it's probably about time, because we had the Declaration of Independence, we had the Declaration that was produced in France, this idea that people were all created equal, that God empowered them and gifted them with certain unalienable rights. Doesn't this include women? Well, of course it includes women, but how are you going to do that? So this was a time of testing that theory. How can we get women out? Not to mention the fact, this is during the Industrial Revolution. Factories are blowing up all over the place. Women are leaving the farms, leaving families. They're moving into the cities where these mills and textile factories are located so that they can work. And that's changing the dynamic back at home. That's changing the dynamic in the cities. Families are changing. So it would make sense that we would, at this time, kind of scratch our head and go, well, do the old traditional ways of thinking need to change about women? And one fine gentleman who sort of spearheaded this in England was a gentleman named John Stuart Mill. In 1869, he published a pamphlet called The Subjection of Women, in which he argues against traditional women's roles, the idea that women belong in the home, pregnant, and taking care of babies was archaic, not only from a standpoint of new innovation and industry, but just from logic. He says, well, what about the great queens, Catherine the Great? What about Queen Elizabeth? Are they not women? Were they not great leaders and great women in our societies? So he argues it very reasonably from a different standpoint than just, well, that's the way it's always been, women belong there. He argued for greater rights for women, for their inclusion, their lifting up in their station. He equated the subjection of women, the traditional women's roles, to the oppression of slavery. In his mind, they were almost no different between the two. Women, when they were married, they lost their right to everything. They could not own land in their name. They could not keep money in their name. And he thought all that, you might as well be a slave. He believed in social and political reforms, that if you change the role, the attitude, the perspective of women in society, that not only will society blossom and grow from all that additional talent and wealth, but it would also strengthen families. Husbands would have something to talk about with their wives other than embroidery or the children. There would be commonality and a greater intimacy between the two. So he argued for all of that. And we're going to actually, this week in our classroom, we're going to look at this particular paper in a little bit more depth. Other ones. So as this time period, this liberalism, this new liberalism sort of emerges, and countries are flipping over, the unification of Germany, the unification of Italy. France is now in its third republic. There's a lot that's going on. Liberalism is rising up, but there's also another one, and that's nationalism. We talked a little bit about this before. What makes a nation? Who am I as a Frenchman? Who am I as a Prussian or German. What makes a citizen a true citizen? And how can we strengthen that sense of identity and unity amongst our own people? And out of this also comes early signs of socialism and early signs of communism. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a later video. But for now, I just kind of want you to wrap your brain around the idea that all this stuff is starting to emerge and people are taking action. It's not just, I believe in something, but it's I believe and I'm now going to do something about it. And it's happening all over the place. And there are schisms and factions and separations and divisions, as well as new partnerships that are taking place during this time. And we will look at some of those in our next video. So we'll see you in just a little bit for part 2.